Thank you very much. Thank you very much for my wonderful host in Fortunia Society and in the Macau region, in the Hong Kong region. Um, my congratulations to the Chinese government for doing a wonderful job in branding these two very, very important cities, which actually I believe will have a very important role to play in in the years to come. So it's my pleasure to be speaking to this forum from Pakistan. The interest that my colleagues showed was about Afghanistan, that it was relayed to me that there's not that much information available on Afghanistan inside China. So there is a lot of yearning, there's a lot of demand for knowing what is going on ground in Afghanistan. And there are certain regions about which Chinese Chinese civilization knows very well. But then there are other lands, especially remote and distant lands, about which we know relatively little. Even though United States and Europe is quite far away, but we tend to know more about them. But we know relatively much less about the region called Afghanistan. And the reason why it is important now at this point in history for China to fulfill and to plug its knowledge gaps on Afghanistan is because this region is poised to play a very important role. Uh, Also, it wasn't that long ago in 2001 that the world actually, for the first time, got a certain impression of Afghanistan. And that was right after 9/11. And that impression was not very good. Afghanistan was at that time recovering from a civil war, which ensued after the Soviet Union attacked the region in 1978, 79, and that lasted for about 10 years. And after a decade, the Soviets had to withdraw. And during that process, many groups inside of Afghanistan joined hands together into what the Muslims call the jihad, the war against the occupiers. Pakistan was very much a part of it. Uh, Saudi Arabia was giving some money here and there, but also playing a role of exporting its ideology, which was not good for Afghanistan in the long run, from which the Taliban have now recently recovered, I would say, over the last 5-6 years. And so these were the times, and the Taliban came into power as young madrasa boys in 1996 and captured the reins of power after the civil war broke out in the aftermath of the Afghan jihad. That the Mujahideen, the ones who fight the jihad, they won. The Soviet Union lost and they left. And after that, there was a power struggle, and nobody would agree as to who would wield the reins of power in Afghanistan, what type of government there would be, and all of those things. So, in this process, in the madrasas of Pakistan, in the religious seminaries, the schools that are not secular but religious schools in Pakistan, a movement arose by a bunch of young boys, which then later became patronized by Pakistani establishment also. And the purpose of that was that one group should triumph. First of all, that group should bring about unity in all the groups. If they are not successful in bringing about unity in all the groups, then there should be one group that should have enough power to have a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. And that group is what we today call the Taliban. The word comes from Madras, from Talib means a student. So Taliban means students. And so, for a lack of better word, this movement actually remained known by the name of Taliban. And essentially, the West actually portrayed it very negatively. They portrayed it negatively because of certain reasons that have to do with the Abrahamic geopolitics. And I will not go into that in this lecture, but perhaps at another lecture, I could go deeper into that. Right now, it would be sufficient just to say that I knew in 1993 that the United States of America was going to overrun the Taliban. The Taliban had not even formed the government, but the United States of America was going to overrun Afghanistan. And at that time, I was a young intern doing my master's in Washington, D.C., from where I later got my PhD and graduated. And at that time, I was working with Ambassador Newman in Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Ambassador and Dr. Shireen Hunter, who was the wife of Robert Hunter, who was the American ambassador to NATO. So that was my office environment. And I was taken to the Capitol Hill for the briefing that was going to be done by Chevron and Exxon. And at that briefing, I felt that the US establishment wants to go into Afghanistan and raid it because of the uh, not only minerals, but at that time it was the pipeline routes, because the Soviet Union had gone down and the gas and oil had to be shipped from Central Asia. And the closest port, of course, was Gwadar, was that of Pakistan. So um, in 2000 and from 1996 to 2001, this group that formed the Taliban made their government by a famous, very smart and distinguished officer of the Pakistani military, General Hamid Gul, who lives nearby, who used to live, he passed away a few years ago, but he lived nearby from the location where I'm sitting right now, the location on your map, which is in Punjab, and his village was nearby. And I had come from Washington, D.C., and I met him at several occasions, and I got a very good insight into how the whole movement began and what was the significance of the importance of the Taliban movement for Pakistan. The importance of that was following: that throughout the Afghan history, India, which is the sworn enemy of Pakistan, has always interfered in Pakistani domestic affairs and spread terrorism from the western side of its border. From the eastern side of border, it has dismembered Bangladesh, uh, which was East Pakistan. It had attacked Pakistan on several occasions, thousands of cross-border violations. Even in the last 1 week, I could say multiple cross-border violations. So in essence, I'm not going to hold back my tongue in or mince my words uh, by not saying that India is a terrorist state. India, for all practical purposes, has unleashed state terrorism, has been its stated and unstated policy at many occasions. And so, so therefore, meddle into Pakistani affairs from the north is its old habit and is a part of their policy. And so General Hamid Gul told me that only during 1996 and 2001, when the Taliban formed their first government, Pakistan did not see terrorism for those 4 or 5 years. And the reason for that is that the Taliban consider Pakistan as their home because they are landlocked and they have to have access for trade, for schools, hospitals, treatment, all different sorts of purposes. Uh, their relatives are here. So Taliban, for Taliban, who are predominantly Pashtun, Pakistan is almost like their second home. And so, and that arrangement has worked fine with us. There are more Pashtuns inside Pakistan than the combined population of Pakistan, whose predominant part are the Taliban Pashtuns. So, therefore, in Pakistan, they have their relatives. And as far as the non-Pashtun Pakistanis like myself are concerned, um, we don't really make a distinction between the Pashtun of Peshawar in Pakistan or the Pashtun of Jalalabad in Afghanistan. They are both my brothers. If I accept one, I accept the other. And so we don't have any problem in accepting the the Pashtuns of Afghanistan, nor do we have any problem in accepting all the other groups of Afghanistan. Remember, Pakistan is the biggest refugee bearing country in the world. At one point, before the successive Afghan wars, we have borne the refugee load between 3 and 6 million Afghans at one time, which is a very heavy refugee load. And Pakistan, as a poor country, has never complained. Why? Because we feel at home with these people. They don't stick out as as aliens. Like you have Syrians have a problem inside Turkey. You have Afghans may have a problem inside Iran, even though language is shared, but many other things are not. But these people, when they come to Pakistan, of course, there is a burden on the poor infrastructure of this country. But at the same time, so many millions have come and made this their home. So it does not make sense that they should not come and we should convert this into a hard border. If Austria and Switzerland is a soft border, if Belgium, Netherlands, and Holland is a soft border, then why make Afghanistan, Pakistan a hard border? Other than the European style nationalism, which is a very backward way of thinking, uh, you know, mm, maybe 2 centuries old way of thinking. Uh, if you go by that, then maybe you can say, okay, Pakistan and Afghanistan are two distinct entities, but both are not really nations. They are transnations. In Afghanistan, there are dozens of ethnicities and languages. In Pakistan, there are dozens of ethnicities and languages. And Pakistan came into being not because of one ethnicity has a legit has a monopoly over all the other legitimate over all the other ethnicities. Uh, it is a conglomerate of different nations. If Pakistan was a European style country, then the national language here would have been Punjabi, because that's the predominant group. But we didn't do that. Inside the province of Punjab today in Pakistan, it is illegal to teach Punjabi in public schools. That's very bad. But that's because our elite are so westernized and still very backwards. They still need to catch up with the world or create their own original thinking. Now, going back to Afghanistan, same thing. So the Afghanistan the reason it can never be conquered, and that's a title of my talk, that geography, that most of the Afghan people are, the central part of that is mountains. And when you look at Eurasia, the opening remarks of my abstract is that whether it's the Attila the Huns or the Mongols or different type of countries that are raiding the western part of Asia, has led to a lot of change, permanent change, which is ethnic, religious, cultural, and so forth, except for Afghanistan, because of its mountains. And so whoever comes here, he either becomes like that or doesn't leave. Or if he comes as a conqueror, is most of the time is killed, because the culture of the people has a connection with the mountainous terrain, which is very hard. These people have pretty much remained ethnically and linguistically almost the same. I wouldn't want to say identically the same, but almost the same over the last 2,000 years. Very little change has occurred in these groups. And so, other than the geographical element and why Afghanistan cannot be captured from outside, there's a cultural element which is linked to its religion. Religion is Islam, which is only 1400 years, 1440 years old, and in Afghanistan it is little over 1,000 years old. And but the understanding of Islam is is mediated by the pre-Islamic tradition called Pashtunwali. Pashtunwali is the code of conduct amongst the Pashtuns. The two do not negate each other. The Pashtunwali and the Islamic Sharia are more or less, they move symbiotically together. It's the it's not, you can have twin understandings. You can have the Islamic Sharia's understanding of Pashtunwali, and you'll see that most of the 9 principles of Pashtunwali are accommodated by the Quran. But if you look at the Pashtunwali and you look at its understanding of the Sharia, produces something very unique. because Sharia is understood differently in different parts of the world. But the Pashtunwali understanding of Sharia emphasizes those principles inside Sharia that pertain to the geography of Afghanistan, which is why the Pashtunwali was there in the first place. So therefore, when the Afghans they make jihad of defensive struggle against the foreign occupation forces, uh, they're actually getting inspiration from the Pashtunwali and its understanding of the Sharia. That's the culture. Otherwise, you would say so many different areas in the Muslim world were colonized. Bangladesh was colonized. It was Muslim. Did the Muslims launch a successful struggle against foreign occupation? No, they gave up very easily. And in many parts of India, they were Islamic, but did the Muslims launch a successful struggle and they were ready to die for their last man, as in the case of Afghanistan? No, they gave up very quickly. They were Muslims. So therefore, you have this confluence of three special things. One is geography, culture, religion, which makes the Pashtun unique inside Afghanistan only. You take this Pashtun and you put him in Alaska, he cannot perform the same way. Maybe he can hold out for a little bit longer than compared to an average human being because they're tough, but they will not work over there. So this confluence of things only works inside this area, and they are non-expansionist. They have no desire to conquer Pakistan or Tajikistan or Uzbekistan or Xinjiang. They have no such desires. The only thing that they're interested in, that if you try to come to our land by force and take us over, we fight to the last man. And so, or if you try to come and tell us that you need to change your system, your thinking, your identity, we fight until the last man. That's their position, that on two things, zero, no negotiation. One is occupation, second is our beliefs and values. There is no negotiation on these two things. Everything else can be negotiated. You want to go and come and go and make a contract on the copper mines? No problem. You want to go and dig lithium? No problem. They will, they're very clever, very intelligent people, as opposed to the propaganda that was unleashed about them in the first phase with 96 and 2001. And then there was a second wave of propaganda that was unleashed against them from 2001 to 2020. And then there's a third wave of propaganda against them, which was from last month until now. Now let's look at what are the demands of the Western world regarding after the humiliating defeat in Afghanistan. How much time do I have left, by the way?
Around 15 minutes.
15 minutes, all right.
Yeah.
So it's very important. One of the things that the West is beating about, this ranting all the time, that, oh, Afghanistan should have inclusive government. The second thing that they are saying is that, oh, the women cannot vigorously shake their bodies at the dance floor, and until they do that, we're not happy. Third, the Afghan culture, the Afghans are very violent people, and their violence comes from Islam, and we cannot allow them to have the Islamic type of government. These are the three things that the West demands from the Afghans. And I think that all three are unreasonable and false. And these three demands contain within themselves a plan of destruction of Afghanistan and a permanent neutralization of the indigenous voices of Afghanistan. Let's deal one by one. The first one, of course, is the whole mantra of inclusion, that the Taliban are being asked to include those elements of into their government which they were fighting over the last 20 years. Imagine if Chairman Mao was asked to bring in Kuomintang as a part of your new socialist government, just to keep things all inclusive. Imagine, excuse me,
No worries.
imagine if the American revolutionaries were asked to keep all the redcoats as a part of the government. Imagine if the French revolutionaries were asked to keep the Ancien regime of Louis XVI as a part of their revolutionary setup. Imagine if the 25% oppressed minority of Saudi Arabia is asked to be a member of the governance councils inside Saudi Arabia to keep the kingdom all inclusive. Imagine if Modi's RSS is asked to give full citizenship rights to Muslims and Kashmiris and Sikhs to keep India all inclusive. If all of this cannot be, then what logic is the international community practicing under which it is demanding the Taliban to bring all those people in whom you were fighting, who were a puppet government of the Americans and the NATO barbarians and all of them? Imagine that they all become part of the Afghan setup. The whole purpose of fighting these puppets was to have self-rule. And now the West, of course, which is never honest, uh, with many non-Western nations and countries, is asking this. So if one has to understand Afghanistan from an international point of view, especially from a Chinese point of view, it is very important that you know the truth. If you don't have the truth as a baseline of your narrative, you can never understand Afghanistan, because you'll become susceptible to the Western propaganda. 9/11 had nothing to do with the Taliban. They had no role to play in 9/11. As a matter of fact, even if we assume, first of all, we have a lot of information that the official narratives of the 9/11 had a lot of holes, but let's not speak about that. But we can still discuss Osama bin Laden. That Mullah Umar at that time told the American government that if you have proof of bin Laden's involvement in 9/11, I will be very happy to hand him over to you. But please bring proof. But the Americans were not interested in giving the proof. Like I said, back from 1993, I know they were more interested in going into Afghanistan, which is what they did. The real motive to get in was to create subversion, that you sit in the heart of Asia. The real enemy is China. They are making BRI. To destroy the BRI, you have to destroy the countries of the Muslim world that lie towards the west of China. That was the planning. So you bother Iran, you create hybrid revolution inside Xinjiang, you bother the northern areas of Central Asian republics in that are close to the Russian underbelly, and you take away the nuclear weapons from Pakistan. That was why America was here. If you don't believe that, and if you believe that America came here to save the women and America came here to spread democracy, then you can never understand the Taliban. You can never understand what is going on today in Afghanistan. It all depends on your grand narrative. All right. The second demand that the Americans are making, or the Western world, France included, and all of the sycophantish, you know, butler boys of the West, they are making, make a big change in the condition of women. First of all, Afghanistan, the Taliban did make a lot of mistakes in their first government from 96 to 2001. And one of the things was actually exaggerated a little bit, but they did ask the women that they should go home and not be a part of the workplace. They destroyed the Buddhas of Bamiyan and all of those things. But at that time, their average age of their leadership was in 20s and early 30s, and they had no clue about how the world works. Today, they have all white beards and they have learned. So the Taliban 2.0 are the same people as Taliban 1.0, but they have learned. And this time around, they did not say anything to the women. They said, you go to the media, work, go to universities, go work, but just be modestly dressed. Don't be coming out wearing short skirts and be vigorously shaking your bodies on the dance floor. They do not like that because there are standards of modesty in the Muslim world, and so they only demand that. It's very similar to when transition was taking place inside China from before the Cultural Revolution era to after. And so the elder, even today, young Chinese girls do not like to go dressed down and then go and see their grandmother and grandfather because they have old mentality. And so out of respect, they wear a little bit more. But once they go out, meet their friends, maybe it's a different story. So give the Afghan women some time like that. To ask them that you should now resemble girls in Copenhagen and in Denmark and in Norway just overnight is not possible. That's like asking a newborn baby that you should start running right away. It cannot happen. And so give them some time. They have been a war-torn society for 40 years. And the Afghan women, and I, in my letter to the Taliban that was published last week, I advised the Taliban that keep in mind that you belong to the civilization where uh, armies of men have been led by women, where Muslim women became scholars first before any other civilization could produce female scholars. Muslim civilization produced empresses before any other civilization started producing sultanas. So yeah, that's a part of history. Nobody can deny that. And so Taliban understand well now that some of their policies that they were, in the previous stint in power from 96 2001 cannot work, and they admit that they made some mistakes, but yet they will not try to make double mistake. So they will go slow on that. The third thing, um, the first was the inclusion, second was women, and third was on the political system. On this subject also, I have sent my words of advice to them that you actually have the right to make a government of that type of government that reflects people's beliefs and values. Now, Taliban, half of the population are Pashtun, that means they are Hanafi Sunni. There are some Shias, sure, and there are some other ethnicities that are Sunnis, sure. 99% of all of Afghanistan is still Muslim. Therefore, to expect that if Afghanistan will actually have a liberal democracy like, you know, let's say Canada or the US or Britain, is neither possible nor desirable. Out of all the groups, China has now a strong resolve that the Western style democracy would have been disastrous for us. And look at when in 1949, Chairman Mao, under his leadership, when we changed course, China actually started making progress. And so, um, despite the fact that um, China is politically communist, its socialism is still guided by Chinese principles. So let me, in a nutshell, tell you that China is a state-based governance model. In the West, there is often a divorce between the state and the government. First, state is one group that, first of all, is like a father. It has to have a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. It comes and consolidates itself and gets all the people to come on board and forms the principles upon which the government will be formed, but those principles must reflect people's beliefs and values. Swedish style liberalism does not reflect beliefs and values of Afghans. Islam does. And Islam accommodates socialism. It also accommodates certain restricted notions of private property. It also accommodates mercantilism, but it does not accommodate dog eat dog ferocious capitalism. It accommodates private property. It accommodates buying, selling, transmissions of one's property to your children, usufructuary rights of land, but it doesn't accommodate that one large fish comes and gobbles up all the other fish. And so that's why the reason China is successful is because it prevents its very large corporations from eating up all of the small business, because it also controls the land. That's very good. So the Chinese political system, from an Islamic point of view, according to my opinion, would be permissible, as long as it is rooted in the principles of transcendence. It is a Chinese political necessity that it has to keep a secular form of government. But Afghanistan has no such compulsion. It doesn't have such necessity. Therefore, they should be free to have a pro-people system with Islamic characteristics. There's nothing wrong with that. Pakistan should have the same. If we had these types of political systems, which are partially inspired by the Chinese experience, then you will see that the footprint of the Western nations inside our countries, which come and transfigure large sections of our economy and state power, that will become less and less and less. In other words, their power to infiltrate in our systems will become less if people actually have built indigenous systems which suit their own needs. And so I think that in all of these three demands that the West is making off of Afghanistan are based on ill will. It's based on planning that they have been beaten in the West militarily. They're beaten by Afghanistan militarily. They lost the war of occupation, but they have not given up hope that they will use these three elements, which is subversion against women, having a Western type of system which can be manipulated and bought out with money, and number three, in the name of inclusion, bring all the enemies of the new state in, so that the Afghanistan now cannot be occupied, attacked from outside, but it can be subverted from inside. That's behind the demand from the Western side, and I have unpacked all of these things for you. Is my time over? Because I could probably go over for another 2 or 3 hours. So I don't want to take up too much
It's okay.
time.
But Dr. Akram, you can have your conclusion, and we will have some questions and
Okay.
answers. Yeah.
All right. All right. So to conclude, what is a lesson for all of us in this? I propose that Afghanistan has never been successfully raided and occupied for too long from outside. Alexander the Great met the same fate. The Bolsheviks met the same fate. The British Empire met the same fate. The Soviet Union met the same fate. And now the American Empire also met the same fate. That's why we call it the graveyard of empires. So anybody who has a single iota of intelligence should never go into Afghanistan with a point of view of occupying it. That's number one. Number two, the three waves of propaganda against the Afghans prevent developing an accurate perception and view of the Taliban. The so-called experts of the Taliban that we find in so many places around the world have never even met one Taliban. They've never met the Taliban. They just extrapolate. They just feed off of the propaganda upon propaganda and try to present them as devils. Now, I have met many of them, and I can assure you, you may laugh at that, but please don't, because very soon you will meet them too. They're probably the most peace-loving people in the world. Most peace-loving people in the world. Ferocious fighters, don't mistake that. Very, very strong fighters. Very, very strong fighters. But if they're on your side and you gain their trust, they give their life for you. You become their friend. They will die for you. And they have much, much more mercy in their hearts than any of the progenitors of the modern republics. Remember what the French did, French Revolution, after it came revolution? They butchered all of the royalty. Remember what the British did, what the Americans did to the British soldiers in America and to the local population. Destroyed them all. Remember what the the Saudi kingdom and the Iranian revolution and all of these powers did to their opposition. They butchered their way to power. And the Taliban came this time into power almost without a fight. And what did they do? They forgave everybody. General amnesty to all. Who has more mercy in their hearts? The progenitors of the modern republics or the Taliban? So one has to develop, because you guys don't come across the Taliban and you don't meet them. Therefore, what it is easy to get swayed by the Western propaganda against them. But at the same time, since all of us are endowed with logic and intelligence, we should always, keep 2 and 2 is 4. The things should add up. That in earlier, when in 2001, when they were attacked, the whole world turned against them. Even Russia, China, Pakistan, all of this, we all turned against them because America was all too strong, too mighty, lying through their teeth very loudly, and we never questioned that. We never took a moment to figure out who was right and who was wrong. Did they really conduct 9/11? Did the 1 million Afghan people killed, injured, displaced, did they really deserve all of that by participating in the heinous attacks of 9/11? I don't think so. So therefore, if if you don't if you don't insist on truth, you can never find this. You can never come to know. You can never find accuracy in developing a proper view about this group. So I think I'll stop here, and perhaps the audience would like to ask some questions at this stage.
Yeah, sure. And thank you, Dr. Akram. And I would really want to share with you some of my personal reflection first. And could you hear me smoothly? I hope the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Yeah, I can hear
apologize.
you.
Apologize again for the network connection things. And I think if one really have rather in-depth understanding of Afghanistan, then it should not come as a great surprise that what happened last month, because Dr. Akram, in the West or in many parts of the world, people are really quite sort of shocked to see such a rapid change in Afghanistan. But it is partly due to the fact that they don't really know Afghanistan is not really a nation state as they would imagine, and there's no effective central government. The government, built by the Americans, and also all sorts of geographical characteristics. But I think they are essential things, but they are not really presented in a pleasant debate about Afghanistan in many parts of the world. So I think it's really important that we should back to the basics otherwise we would not have sound or meaningful discussions. That's the first thing. The second, and I would want to ask a questions, but first, a member of audience would want to ask a question first. Is that she asked, Taliban recently said they will restore part of the monarchy constitutions, and could you share with us something about that? Because
Yes.
it sounds yeah. And the second thing I would like to ask is because I saw a YouTube video of you speaking, and you say it's time for Pakistan to expand, not politically, not to conquer the lands of others, but it's time for Pakistan to expand. And would this latest change in Afghanistan have any implication to the politics of Pakistan? But I get a new angle today, because in your view, it's like Pakistan, Afghanistan. You can't really separate them, right? Yeah, please,
Right. Yeah.
Professor.
Thank you. I think first of all, let me congratulate your intelligence that you asked very, very important questions. These are actually very fundamental. Let's deal with the first question first, that of the constitution, because this just happened 2 days ago. Now, the Taliban have been surprising everybody. There was the Americans thought that there would be a civil war. They actually didn't think that. They were preparing for that, and they tried their best to precipitate the civil war, because their planning was that if we occupy Afghanistan, then we will foment a color revolution inside Pakistan, because eventually we want to dismember Pakistan, deny China the Gwadar port, destroy the BRI, and procure the Pakistani nuclear weapons. This is still their planning. They still aim to do that. And so, but that didn't, they failed at doing that. Now, the second, of course, was that once they leave Afghanistan, then they will activate the sleeper cells. India had 66 terror training camps where they produce members of Daesh. Daesh is not some indigenously homegrown Islamic organization. It's a fake organization. Daesh, ISIS,
Daesh.
TTP, Al-Nusra, a lot of these things. These are all private military companies trained by the rogue elements inside global intelligence agencies. Sometimes they're used in Syria, sometimes they're used in Pakistan, sometimes they're used in Afghanistan, sometimes they're used in Africa. And so, because of the dwindling empire, because of America's ability to take casualties in straight war, they use proxies. Okay, so let's be clear about that. And so their planning was to activate the sleeper cells built around the terror training camps inside Afghanistan, that when the Americans leave, we will have, on one hand, the Afghan National Army would be fighting the Taliban, and on the second hand, we would actually activate terrorism and export it to Pakistan. And so this was their planning, which also failed. And so the disorientation that led in America to today was actually a surprise upon surprise upon surprise. No civil war took place. America, Taliban were fine with women going to work. They last week there was a big meeting, and they brought in minorities, and they're trying to give in as many ministries of the interim setup to the other minorities. And they will, in the second setup after the interim, they will vet more people from different types of ethnic groups to actually have, you know, be a membership in the government. So the Taliban actually surprised everyone. And the last surprise that came just day before yesterday is that everybody was thinking that they will actually make very strict Islamic constitution, and the propaganda that exists in the Islamophobia industry around the world was trying to convince the world that they will cut off hands, they will beat people, and all of that. They didn't do any of that. Instead, what did they do? They go back to 1950s, and King Zahir Shah Durrani, who was a king of Afghanistan, used to have he used to have a constitution which was a secular in orientation, because the Europeans insisted that every nation state declare itself to be a republic. And so the Taliban don't want, if they think that it is going to be an Islamic system, then it cannot be a republic. It cannot be a nation state. Why? Because Islam doesn't, it thinks that category of nation is too narrow. And so it doesn't accommodate nationalism, that my country is better than your, I am with my country, I die for my country, right or wrong. This notion finds no traction in Islam. If you are a different nation and your words and deeds are better than mine, then you're better than me. If my words and deeds are better than yours, then I'm better than you. So, so first of all, nationalism. Second, republic cannot be, because in Islamic political philosophy, human beings have limited sovereignty. In a republic, all sovereignty belongs to people. In Islamic concept of sovereignty, absolute sovereignty belongs to the heavens, the Tao, and limited sovereignty belongs to the yellow emperor, to Zille Ilahi, to the shadow of God, the ruler, the temporal authority. That's Islamic political thought. So therefore, it cannot be a nation state, it cannot be a republic. So they pick up the constitution from the 1950s, from the time of Zahir Shah, Zahir Shah Durrani, who was one of the last kings of Afghanistan from the Durrani dynasty. And they made it the constitution. Why? Because just like Pakistan, you have 1973 constitution, the most useless piece, garbage, which should be thrown in the dustbin. It serves no political purpose for Pakistan, and it is not even uh, in the same shape that it used to be in 1973, but we still call it our constitution. So my advice to the Taliban was that they don't need a constitution. Does Israel have a constitution? No. Britain has an unwritten constitution.
Yeah, yeah,
Israel doesn't even have borders. So if the most powerful country of the world, at least the region, but certainly very influential in the world, the Israelis, they don't have borders, they don't have a constitution, yet it functions, right? So what the Taliban need is some SOPs, standard operating procedures, and run their government for a year or two. Out of that experience, some challenges will come out. That what you call constitution should respond to those challenges, and the SOPs should be tightened and made more perfect. If you keep on doing that for about 5 years, you have some basic principles and guidelines as to how you will proceed. You can call that your constitution. There's no need to write that. If you write a constitution in a liberal Westminster style of democracy, that means you put an iron straitjacket on your body that will allow you to that you can neither grow nor can you shrink. So it actually prohibits your flexibility and destroys your pragmatism, because human existence sometimes requires flowing along with the principles. Sometimes it requires modification in the principles. So if you make a constitution inspired by France, Germany, or Italy, you will lose. So that's on the issue of constitution. The second thing that you made a reference to my earlier idea, in which in
yeah,
a conference in last January or February on Junagadh in India. The president of Azad Jammu Kashmir, myself, and Nawabzada of Junagadh, the Prince of Junagadh, we shared a forum called the Junagadh Black Day, in which I presented a notion that Pakistan is not a country or a nation state, it is an idea.
yeah,
And because it is an idea, it can expand or contract. Now, this notion I will unpack later. Let me now go back to 1950s by a French scholar by the name of Louis Dupré. He argued in 1950s that it does not make sense to make Afghanistan and Pakistan as two separate countries, because Pakistan was just being born in 1947, and soon we realized that Afghanistan is really an appendage, a large appendage to Pakistan, because it cannot survive on its own. Today, Afghanistan has about maybe 36, 37 million people. It has its arable land is maybe 11.8% land that can grow things, which means that the Afghan soil can only feed about 1.7 million out of 37, 36 million people. The other 35, 36, 35 million people have to be fed from Pakistan, which produces surplus wheat and grain and rice. And this has been so from the very beginning. So, and if you go along the border areas or even deep inside Afghanistan, you realize that the Pakistani rupee is used along with the currency that now the Americans brought once they put the puppet government of Ashraf Ghani and the one before him. So you have to, Chairman Mao used to say, seek truth from facts. Now, what is a fact? The fact is that Afghanistan cannot survive on its own because it doesn't have enough arable land. Now, it has a lot of gold and has a lot of, graphite, a lot of, lithium, a lot of copper, and a lot of gas and pipeline routes. That first, it cannot give it revenue right away. First, it has to be developed. And who is going to develop it? The cheaper cost of development can only come from China, because China is your neighbor, very nearby. It's the cheapest bidder and is a friend. West is very distant, is your enemy in form of NATO. They came and killed 1 million people of yours, occupied your country, and is very expensive bidder. of building infrastructure. So who would you go with? The cheapest nearby, who's a friend, or the furthest, who's enemy and very expensive? Obviously, you would go with the former. So therefore, if China comes in and starts building, it will still have to give loans to the Taliban, to Afghanistan, to extract the resources at favorable cost, at a cost to the Afghan people. And therefore, to avoid that debting in the long run, it's not a negative debting, because I believe that China is a benign country. It is a friend of Pakistan, and it is a friend of Afghanistan. And China knows its benefit and its loss. It's a very smart and efficient system. It's a pro-people system. It's in favor of its own people, and it's also in favor of people outside of China. So just the way China as will expand, China has not expanded since 1949 in its current borders, but China has expanded from the time of Confucius. If you look at the map of China, Lu and Wu and near Shandong were tiny little territories, and today China is large. China is not physically, geographically going to expand from here, but it will financially expand into the world, and it deserves to do that, and it should do that, because it has to replace the West, because West is backward, ferocious, cruel, atrocious, and China is relatively much more benign, respects the people. That's why we support the rise of China, because we find more humanity in China. And China has a capacity to change with time. The West remains stuck in one path for a long period of time. So in the same way, Pakistan as an idea is going to expand into two directions. One, into Afghanistan, and get all of it, because we have Pashtun people live amongst us. We call them our brothers. They are about 25% of our military. They are a very important part of our economy. So we have no problem embracing more of such people. Second, India, because of its newly emergent fascism, which was always under the surface, but since 2019 it has come out openly on the surface, is oppressing Kashmiris and the Sikh movement. The Khalistanis do not want to remain with India for too long. They are adjacent culturally, uh, 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 coterminous with Punjab. All of these sacred spots of the Sikh community in India, in Punjab, lie inside Pakistan. Pakistan is ready to open up our borders for the Sikh community to come to Kartarpur, come to Panja Sahib, come to Nankana Sahib, and all of their sacred spots that all are inside Pakistan. Just like the Mecca and the Medina for Muslims are inside Arabia, similarly, the Mecca and Medina of the Sikh community is inside Pakistan. And so we don't want to deprive them from this. And they are a very honorable people who have been oppressed and suffered enormously under the weight of Indian fascism for a very long time. Therefore, the idea of Pakistan is ready to accommodate them. Back in 1947, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, offered to the Sikh community that you will repent later on with what the right-wing Hindu mobs will do with you one day. So you are free to come into Pakistan. But the Sikh community was betrayed by their leadership and could not see the game. And that's why the Khalistan movement today, the Sikh community in Canada and North America, which is very affluent, more than 5 million people in diaspora, they are very clear about their demands that we want to have either an independent Khalistan, or we will somehow remain connected with Pakistan. They really consider themselves as Pakistanis. And the Kashmiris, the occupied Kashmir of India, every time there's a death, they wrap themselves in green flag, Pakistan flag, and then they lower them in the graves. So there's no question as to who Kashmiris are. They're very much. And with Kashmir is attached Ladakh, uh, which is part of, we call it the Little Tibet. And so if you're friends with China, these territories can be shared. But if you're enemies with China, China will find plenty of ways to punish you. And so I think that Indians are pushing their luck against that. And they have now fairly burnt all their bridges, and they've lost all their trust with China. Wuhan spirit was a wonderful turning point for for India to take up the opportunity and to develop further the trust between China and India, and that would have furthered their trust with Pakistan as well. But because of the backwardness of their thinking, because they find it very hard to come out of that fascist form of thinking, so I think that they have missed the bus, and now in due course of time they will have to pay the price for that. So Pakistan will end up being part of what I call the Pak cross. What does Pak stand for? It stands for Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kashmir, and Khalistan. PAKK. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Khalistan, Kashmir. This is an east-west axis, and then cutting this is a north-south axis, which is Kashgar and Gwadar. Kashir in Xinjiang and Gwadar, the port. That's a north-south, and this is a cross like this. You have Kabul, Islamabad, Lahore, and Amritsar, and the Sikh areas, and you have the north-south, because even if Khalistan comes about, it'll still be landlocked. It will still need Pakistan. So these two countries actually will always need Pakistan for trade, security, food, defense. And Pakistan and China are joined at the hip, because China needs Pakistan also for trade, security, energy security, and a whole host of other things. So it turns out that Pakistani real estate is very expensive. It's very important for many countries, most importantly for China, for Afghanistan, and for Khalistan Kashmir. And this cross will actually determine, right now, if you think along national lines, this logic will not make sense to you. But if you think according to the needs of the people, perhaps it will make sense to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Akram. And probably I would have want to ask the questions, but I think probably you have already answered it, because probably you remember in the last month, before the takeover of Kabul, the representative of the Taliban met the Chinese foreign minister, right? And at that time, I remember like the West, people in the West, especially for example, the authors for magazines like The Diplomat, they would like to say, it's just a honeymoon. And there's a big issue called Xinjiang separatists in China, and the Taliban is also Muslim. So there will be a hurdle between the further relations between Afghanistan and China. And I think in your view, it's not really as big an issue as they would like to portray, right? That's my last question.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is a very important question from the point of view of China, and Chinese policymakers have the right to actually look into this problem with a great depth. And I have myself actually consulted at several different forums and my friends inside China, that my own view, and I will claim that in due course of time this will prove out to be true, that China has nothing to worry about from Afghanistan, from the Taliban. It had a lot to worry about from the secular government of Ashraf Ghani and Zalmay Khalilzad and Hamid Karzai. Now, I know Ashraf Ghani and Zalmay Khalilzad since the days I was doing my PhD in Washington. You know, I used to get into discussions and a lot of intellectual fights with these guys back then. And I advised the Pakistani government also to be very careful about supporting them, because they are no friends of Pakistan and they were no friends of China. And so using the Wakhan corridor, I know that during the time of Ashraf Ghani, a free hand was given to the Indians, especially, and some even very unfortunately, my Iranian colleagues as well, actually in the Panjshir Valley, were aiding, Iranians were not aiding this bit of terrorism against China, which was infiltration into Xinjiang, but India was facilitating that, to use the Badakhshan region of Afghanistan to actually infiltrate the ISIS fighters inside of Xinjiang, to go and radicalize do more recruitment inside Xinjiang, and also wherever you get a chance, do sabotage. And so thanks to the Chinese security, that it is so tight inside Xinjiang that every time I go to Urumqi, or sometimes I have to get fingerprinted all the time on the road, and which is good because it's a, you know, that's the only way to ensure security. If you don't do that, then you'll have bombs going on everywhere. So, so it's a, so you know, the West make a propaganda that China is, you know, doing genocide inside Xinjiang, but it's not. You know, that's all false because West is always lying. It's actually a high-level surveillance state. I mean, the Israeli surveillance is greater than the Chinese surveillance in Xinjiang, and you know, many parts of Britain inside are stronger surveillance maybe than Xinjiang. So that's all nonsense on the part of the West. That, you know, so now we come to the point where whether the Taliban will actually champion the cause of their imaginary or real cause of their Muslim brothers in Xinjiang. They will not.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because they know and they have been advised by the right people that that portrayal of the Xinjiang issue is false.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, there were problems. You know, in 1960s, 70s, China had a different guiding philosophy. In days of Cultural Revolution, you know, we went about, you know, uh, against many groups, you know, including the Confucian tradition, including Buddhism, including Taoism, and, you know, some Muslim areas and so forth. And now today's China, it feels very different from that. Today's China has
Yeah.
so much freedom for faith communities. When I come to China, I go to mosque, I pray. Nobody stops me from praying. I eat halal food all the time. I went to the Yunnan province for the whole month of Ramadan to fast in a beautiful weather. So, you know, the therefore the Afghan Taliban are not going to fall for the Western propaganda of the Xinjiang issue. If,
Mm-hmm.
let's assume for a second that China starts oppressing the Muslims in Xinjiang for no reason, which it is not, but let's assume for a second that it does. You know what the Taliban will do? They call you up first. They said, we are concerned about, you know, why are you doing that? And what the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese will do, said, okay, you come and see with yourself. Like when we raised that issue with the government, Chinese government took us in Xinjiang. They said, okay, you see with yourself. And I traveled on my own. And, you know, of course, there is surveillance, but there is no genocide. There is no other things. And the reason there is strong surveillance is because the CIA is so active, is to infiltrate more ISIS, more Daesh, and to bring about the color revolution the same way that CIA is very active in Hong Kong, which is why they want to break away Hong Kong again from China. And so this is
Mm-hmm.
why I think that the Afghans are only worried about Afghanistan. They don't have, they are not going to get involved by Xinjiang or anything, especially when they realize that they need China for, even if they have to sneeze, they need China. They have to
Mm-hmm.
build your roads, your defense, your networks, you know, everything. Now, second thing, but this should not be confused that if the Muslims of Kashmir are suffering, which is a real issue, or Muslims of Palestine are suffering, which the Israelis have stole their land, the Taliban will not stay quiet on that. They are not too strong to do physically anything against it, but they will, in the United Nations or in the world body, or one day they become part of SEO, they will voice their opinion in the favor of these causes. It's their right. Just like where China has a right to worry about the Chinese, Han Chinese of Hong Kong or Taiwan or Macau, same way, the Muslims of Afghanistan have a right to champion the Kashmiri issue, the Palestine issue, and any other issue where that may be. But because the Xinjiang issue is a whole lot of propaganda based on some initial problems that we may have had, the Taliban know that in matters of realpolitik, this is a no-go area for China. That
Yeah.
it's better for the Xinjiang Muslims to remain inside China. At least they have roads, they have electricity, they have food, they have free health, they have free education across the border in Pakistan and Afghanistan. We don't have any of that. And so
Okay.
it's probably
Okay.
it's probably better for them to
Okay.
stay there. And
Okay.
once the BRI takes place, and the fluidity remains, and the situation becomes normal, then of course like everybody will go everywhere, and there will be no problem.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Akram. Let's see how the Afghan-China relations will evolve. But as you say, we have reason to be optimistic. Thank you again, Dr. Akram, for
Welcome.
bringing us this very insightful sharing. And I personally learned quite a lot for that. Apologize again for the network issue, but I think we have a very smooth conclusion. And thank you, all the members of audience. And the Fortunate Society will have further webinars as wonderful as this one we have tonight. And stay tuned. And thank you very much again, Dr. Akram. Professor Wu, anything to add?
Well, I just want to thank Professor Akram and the excellent and very insightful. And of course, we're going to ask you more questions. And also, I'd like to have you mentioned some of your articles. Could you email that to us? Yeah, I would like to read it. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.